We're broadcasting live all night long and into the early hours of the morning to bring you all the details as we get them, and also live blogging. Klaus Welle, as you can see, the whole Parliament has been transformed into an electoral hub. Can you just remind our viewers what exactly is the role of this institution? Why are these elections so important, and why have they gotten even more important as the years have gone by?
Look, this European Parliament is equal lawmaker. So on more or less everything, it's as strong as the ministers assembled in the Council of Ministers. The Parliament has also the last word on all trade agreements. And to start with, the European Commission only comes into office through this Parliament. So one of the very first big decisions is who is going to be elected President of the European Commission. Then there are hearings on individual commissioners. Normally this Parliament rejects one or two. That's a power national parliaments don't have. And also national parliaments do not have that liberty on legislation because they are bound to support their governmental majority.
So whereas in the past, Cynthia, many would have looked at the European Parliament as a multilingual talking shop, just writing perhaps resolutions, it's really radicalised and has much more powers now. And that's why it's so important that people have gone out to vote in the last few days. But we've seen in countries like Spain, huge country like Spain, actually voter turnout has been very low. It's dropped a lot.
Yeah, I think we've seen that in more countries. I think Croatia was also just announced, which is relatively low. Interestingly, in the Netherlands, it actually has grown a bit. I think it's the highest since maybe 10, 20 years.
Why is that?
They said actually because there were two big blocks, let's say. You had the far right. People said they would do well. At the other side, you had the Greens and the Socialist Democrats. I think people really felt like they had something to choose. It was quite black and white. And that could be one of the explanations.
And you mentioned France. We can take a look now at what has been the latest over in France. Obviously another very important European country alongside Spain. So we obviously have our correspondent as well on the ground in Paris all night long. But we can take a look at the first estimates coming out of France tonight. And it looks like Rassemblement National, so the political party affiliated with Marine Le Pen, and the 28-year-old young man Jordan Bardella getting 31.5% there of the votes, whereas Renaissance, the party of Emmanuel Macron, the Prime Minister, 15.2%. I mean, and the Socialists, they're down at 14%. I mean, that's not much of a surprise, Klaus Welle. I mean, this is what we've been reporting for months and months, and we've seen the popularity of Jordan Bardella in the last couple of months as well, absolutely triple.
Yeah, I think it's the long-term consequence of President Macron having destroyed the alternance between a moderate centre-right and a moderate centre-left when he got elected. So now you have the two poles, which is either President Macron or, on the other hand, the extreme right. And that means when people are unhappy, they go for the extreme right. So there's a heavy price which we are seeing is now going to be paid, because the moderate centre-right and the moderate centre-left were destroyed 2 presidential elections ago.
Big test for, of course, elections as well coming up in France in 2027. I mean, a lot of these European Parliament election results are a bit of a reflection of what could potentially happen in our member states, in our countries. And now taking a look at France, it looks like that party could potentially be moving into the Élysée Palace and taking over from President Emmanuel Macron in 2027.
Yeah, I think also most of those European elections are almost a midterm vote and expression of how people think about their current government. I think especially because the elections were in 2022, this is probably the first moment where voters could say, actually, I don't agree with Macron, and I would go for the far right in this case.
And Klaus Welle, how do you feel about the fact that on the same day as the European Parliament elections, in many countries across the board, there are also local elections or elections for local mayors, referendums. In Slovenia, I believe there was a number of referendums as well this weekend. Does that help the cause? Does that encourage people to go out and vote? Or does it just make the European Parliament elections an afterthought?
No, I see we nowadays have experienced already during the last European elections that people feel that they are directly concerned by what's being decided in this House and in the European institution. Let's just take Ukraine, let's take COVID. There are major decisions. There was a last major decision in April about new border rules for the European Union. So whereas 20 years ago people were thinking, okay, that doesn't have a lot to do with my precise life, nowadays they have. But it's true that if you combine it with local and regional election, participation is higher. And that's, by the way, why Spanish participation is down. because last time around there were also regional and local elections in Spain.
And tell us, you of course are from the Netherlands, you're from The Hague, and you alluded to the fact that voter turnout has increased. But can you talk us through the results so far of the actual results? Because I believe we have the exit polls.
Yeah, actually we knew already a lot on Thursday when the exit polls came out, because the Netherlands voted on Thursday. As expected, the party of Geert Wilders did very well. They went up from 1 seat to 7. Since the Greens and the Socialists and Democrats, they joined forces, they also gained quite some seats. They're at 8. But on an EU level, you have a problem because they have to choose their own political groups. So they might each have 4 seats. So I think the results were not as surprising. I think most people were expecting this.
And just remind our viewers, what does Geert Wilders stand for exactly?
Well, he's been known in Dutch politics for a long time, actually, for 20 years. And they advocate for, anti-migration, anti-EU as well, although they now scrapped that from their party program. But they're quite conservative. They don't want a lot of EU interference. Since they will also join the national government, we'll see, I think, and hear a lot from them.
And what about the European People's Party? Would you be happy to work with the party of Geert Wilders?
Definitely not. Inside the ID group in here, you have those who, to put it in a nutshell, would be happy even without the European Union, who would like to see a completely different Europe, who basically would like to destroy what Christian Democrats have built after the Second World War. So there's no possibility to cooperate between the European People's Party and the ID group.
And just to remind our viewers, if you want to create a political group here in the Parliament, you need 23 members of the European Parliament from 7 countries. And with that comes a lot of perks, a lot of privileges. That means you have more speaking time, you have as well EU money, funding, in order to be able to promote your ideas, your beliefs, organise events. So how could this Parliament change and the policies that are voted upon if the ID group gets even bigger?
I think the effect of the ID group getting bigger will be extremely limited because they are not cooperating. The ECR group is in a different position. The ECR group is engaging in legislation, trying to compromise, trying to form coalitions, and they can have a real impact also on content in here. But I think what makes a big change is there are about 40 seats to be lost between the Liberals and the Greens together. And that means that what was existing up to now, a possibility for a so-called progressive alliance, progressive coalition, which could impose itself on all the rest, that might not exist anymore in the next Parliament.
And the Greens we've seen doing very badly in Germany, for example, whereas back in 2019 there was a lot of momentum on the streets of Europe. Every Friday we saw the Friday for Future movements out, and Frans Timmermans, the former commissioner in charge of climate, said that the Green Deal was actually inspired by them, and that's why it even came about. But now, for example, bad news for the Greens in Germany. We've seen the Alternative for Deutschland come second place, according to our estimates in Germany. I mean, that's pretty bit of a big deal there.
Exactly. I think it's interesting, especially with so many important green topics on the agenda. Perhaps it also means that some of the traditional parties have adapted, and for example the SD could be an alternative to people who normally vote green. But interesting to see if that will change also in other member states, if they will keep some seats there.
And we can talk through the estimates actually coming from Germany. They're coming up there on our screens. I'd like to talk about the PSW there, the Bundeswagenknecht Party. I mean, she is really the new kid on the block, Klaus Welle. Tell us more about her.
Look, she has been actively in politics with the Die Linke party, but she's now proposing a different brand of left-wing politics. We could say that this is the burst of left-wing populism, because economically she's on the left, but she's against migration and she is not, not so distant to Russia, let's put it like this. So we might see in this parliament the creation of a left populist group, because there's also the 5 Stars in Italy, which are quite sizable and are looking for a home. They are not in a group now, and theoretically also the possibility of Smer, the governing party in Slovakia. So populism is no longer limited to the right. It could also go to the left. And if you look at the ANO party in the Renew, the liberal group, they also have sometimes some populist elements in their policies.
But the Renew group, Cynthia, which traditionally has been the kind of kingmaker here in the European Parliament, propping up the coalition between the Socialists and the European People's Party, they look like they could potentially disintegrate tonight, no, with some members being moved out. And what do you see the future of that party being?
Yeah, exactly, and it also will be interesting to see if somehow with some of the, because the parties will not have to, the groups don't have to stay as they are. I mean, they might also change. So who knows, maybe a new alliance will be formed to kind of replace that. But as it looks right now, it looks like they will disappear. They will also take some Dutch seats probably, because tomorrow we will know if the VVD party of Mark Rutte will leave this group. Others were not too happy that on a national level he cooperates with the far right. So that might even mean another 4 seats that they leave.
And now just to go back to this idea of the Spitzenkandidat, right? So this process that we should take into consideration what is the outcome of the European elections when it comes to appointing the European Commission President. So it worked back in 2014. Jean-Claude Juncker, who campaigned all across the continent, was the Spitzenkandidat. And because the European People's Party did the best, he ended up being the Commission President. But it was just thrown out the window in 2019 when EU heads of state and government decided not to endorse this process, and then they plucked Ursula von der Leyen then just out of the blue. It was a decision of Emmanuel Macron and the former German Chancellor Angela Merkel back in 2019. Now, this all sounds very confusing to our viewers, but what do you think the future of this whole Spitzenkandidat process is? Do you think that Ursula von der Leyen could now be the Commission President, as we see the EPP do so well tonight?
I think this might be the night of the comeback of the Spitzenkandidaten. In fact, if Ursula von der Leyen has a decisive lead, so not just a couple of seats, but 15, 20, 30, maybe even 40, I think it will be very difficult to ignore that. Also because I think she had quite a successful time in office over the last 5 years. So governments are not so much interested in the Spitzenkandidaten because they would like to decide that independently.
Not interested, Klaus. They hate it. They despise it. They do not want anyone to have more power, of course, than themselves.
Exactly.
But what about you? How do you feel about the last 5 years of Ursula von der Leyen's rule? Do you think she has managed to do a good job of keeping the continent unified?
I think she can be somebody that most people would endorse. If you look at, for example, from a gender perspective, I think she actually made sure that the Commission was very gender balanced. And also in the last European Parliament election, I think they voted for the highest number of female candidates. So from that perspective, for example, it's quite progressive. So we'd hope that that would also continue in the new Commission.
And I remember she was very specific about the fact that member states needed to propose 2 candidates as commissioners, 1 female and 1 male. So yes, it's a topic she took very seriously, whereas I'm sure back in the 90s when you were here, I'm sure that wasn't a priority at all.
Let's say it's gotten much stronger, and in fact we have a double act. The EPP has 2 very strong women with Roberta Metsola, President of Parliament, and Ursula von der Leyen. And maybe in the past people would have thought that's a left-wing priority. No, it's the EPP which puts strong women into the forefront.
And just you mentioned Roberta Metsola, she is the current President of the European Parliament. She comes from Malta, the beautiful Mediterranean island, and I believe that she's not doing so badly. I believe they'll be sending 6 members of the European Parliament to Brussels and Strasbourg, and I believe that her party has taken 3 seats, and I understand that the Socialists have taken 3 as well. So it's potentially possible that she could be coming back, right, for 2.5 more years as President of the Parliament.
I think she has a very good chance because independently of her own party position, she's very much respected in the House, both on the left and on the right. She's been a reformer in this place, and I think she has earned herself a second mandate. Of course, it's up to vote in the European Parliament, but I'm rather convinced she will also be the President in the next half-term, 2.5 years.
And speaking of Roberta Metsola, she's actually just arrived in the building. She's heading down to the hemicycle, and very shortly she'll be briefing the press. There's 1,000 journalists in the hemicycle tonight. It's been transformed into a gigantic press room, and throughout the night we'll be hearing what all the latest is from there. We'll be getting exit polls as well, and I think around 11 o'clock tonight we'll be hearing as well from the main Spitzenkandidat, this process that we mentioned earlier. But interesting, and Cynthia, because you of course cover tech for Euronews, so you're covering all the regulations and policy when it comes to tech. And the EU has a bit of an interesting relationship with platforms like TikTok, because of course it's Chinese owned, but we've seen Roberta Metsola take that decision, she said inspired by her kids, I think, to go on TikTok and campaign there, because she said that's where people are and that's where I need to reach out. But here in the Parliament there's a ban on actually using, employees can't use the app on their phone. So it's a bit of a conundrum really, isn't it, for politicians trying to reach out to the public, trying to be where they are, but also the tricky situation there.
Yeah, I think they realize that probably they do have, they can use their platforms for their own attention and for their own messages. I think there was a distinction in the end between work phones and private phones for the use of TikTok, so perhaps there's a kind of a loophole there. But yeah, this Parliament and this Commission has done a lot on technology. They've come out with the AI law, obviously, with DSA, platform regulation. So I think most lobbyists would be happy with some deregulation in the next Commission.
And how have you seen the campaigns change in the last 30 years when it comes to European Parliament elections? And are you hopeful that tonight voter turnout will increase due to the presence of the European Parliament as well on these platforms, trying to reach out to people?
I think participation should at least be stable. Maybe we are seeing a slight increase. But as we have said, for example, Spain, which is a big country, last time round had also regional elections and local elections. So if they are not, then you have a slightly lower result. But I think at least they will be stable. They might be potentially increasing. We have seen a professionalization of the campaign and also of this evening. And I think 2014 has been a watershed moment, because the lead candidates, the Spitzenkandidaten, drew a lot of public attention. Whereas before the election campaign was 3 weeks before the election, very much nationally. Now you have a lot of reporting on the European level, not just by Politico and other news outlets. There's a lot of attention drawn to those elections months in advance. And we see with this election evening, it's highly professional. It's absolutely on the level, maybe above in what you can see in some member states.
And is it time for the European Parliament to have a seat at the summit table? Because now the European Parliament President is only allowed to pop in for a half an hour for a chat with heads of state and government. Should the Parliament have more presence so the voice of the people is also in those closed-door summit meetings?
I mean, to be in the European summits, the first 30 minutes, it's something important. And I've been accompanying presidents of the European Parliament for those 30 minutes. And it has been very different. With Roberta Metsola, there were not just 2, 3 polite questions. Normally there were 8, 9 or 10. And not only from our own family and also beyond. But the key thing is decision-making power. So it's nice to be at the European Council, at the summit, but the key thing is that European Parliament decides, not just participates in a debate.
So it's nice for a selfie, but it's not the most important thing. And of course, Roberta Metsola, Klaus Welle, she put herself on the political map, if you like, being the first European politician to visit Ukraine as well, after that full-scale invasion of Ukraine back in 2022 on the 24th of February. But if you've just joined us, we are live here broadcasting from the European Parliament in Brussels, bringing you all the latest from all across the continent on the results. Europeans have been voting since Thursday, 27 countries, 1 election. And now we can bring in the estimates from Spain, from Madrid, to see how the political parties have been doing there. And as you can see, they're pretty actually tight between the two main parties, the PSOE, so the Socialists, and the Partido Popular, which are of course the European People's Party, so affiliated to the European People's Party. Quite tight there. I mean, this of course was a bit of a litmus test for Pedro Sanchez and his amnesty law as well. I mean, we've all been gripped, Cynthia, to Spanish politics for the last year or so. Also, let's have a look how Vox have been doing. Okay, they got 10.4%, and then, yeah, Podemos down at the bottom, 4.4%, so that's the left group not doing so well. I mean, was that something you would have expected there, Cynthia?
Well, this could be another example where this vote is seen also as very much a vote against or for a government. I think it's very interesting that they're doing so well on the EPP side, also for a big country like Spain, because they gain a lot of MEPs at once. Yeah, and perhaps it's just a government midterm vote.
But it could be interesting now to see how Spanish domestic politics unfold with this result, because it's really the Spanish people saying that they are not happy, perhaps, with Pedro Sanchez and his current government.
Yeah. I mean, what I draw from those election results is that if you have a functioning competition and real alternatives between a moderate centre-right and a moderate centre-left, then the extremes are shrinking. Because both Vox, but also the extreme left, had much higher results a couple of years ago. And now with that competition reinstalled between the Socialist and the People's Party, the extremes are shrinking, and that's maybe also a message for other countries.
Well, speaking of other countries, we can now head over to France, or bring up a graph on how the estimates are looking in France, the neighbour here to Belgium. And it looks like Rassemblement National are up there on the top of the graph there at 31.5%, followed by Renaissance, which is the party of the French President Emmanuel Macron, polling at 15.2%, followed by the Socialists at 14%. And then down at the bottom, we see a number of other smaller groups. The Republican down at the bottom, that's the group affiliated to your party there, 7.2%. They're not doing well at all in France. But let's actually head over to Paris and bring in Euronews' correspondent, Sofia Katzkinkova, who is standing by for us in Paris. We spoke to you earlier, Sophia. It was lovely to see you. You've been out on the streets speaking to voters. What more have you for us, or what more have you got for us now at 26 minutes past 8?
Well, after the polling station where I was earlier, I'm currently at the National Rally's electoral party in eastern Paris, where they rented out, as you can see, this beautiful pavilion in the middle of the park for tonight. And I mean, the atmosphere is absolutely electric here. The champagne is flowing, and all of his supporters, and including his whole campaign team, they tell me, are extremely happy with the results. As you mentioned it, 31.5% of votes, far ahead of the president's Emmanuel Macron party, headed by Valérie Ayé, which is currently struggling at 15.2% of votes. And Jordan Bardella, who is the 28-year-old politician leading the far-right French party, just gave a short victory speech. And in a couple of minutes, it is Marine Le Pen that is going to take the stage and give another victory speech in just a couple of minutes. She's the historic leader of the National Rally party. And it's not the first time that the National Rally has come ahead in these EU elections. That was the case in 2019, but they were always very closely followed by Macron's Renaissance Party. And I mean, this year they're just crushing it, more than 15 points ahead for the presidential camp. It's a landslide victory. And this could also mean a very big challenge for President Emmanuel Macron and his party. Another interesting point that I've been told by Bardella's campaign director is that these elections are a sort of litmus test for the upcoming 2027 French presidential elections. And we're told that Bardella could be eyeing the Élysée Palace in a couple of years. For his part, French President Emmanuel Macron is currently at the Élysée Palace, surrounded by his team, closely analyzing the results and figuring out what to do next. And we've also just found out that he will give a televised speech tonight in the evening after the final results are announced after 11 p.m. And of course, I'll be following and giving you the latest updates live from Paris. Back to you, Brussels.
You will. Thank you so much, Sophia, for that update and for bringing us so much colour as well there on the champagne bottles being cracked open there at the headquarters of the National Rally, and then soul searching in the Élysée Palace by Emmanuel Macron and his colleagues. I mean, this is huge news coming out of France tonight. This is huge news coming out of France tonight.
Yeah, I mean, that's the result which was expected, but it's clear that at a certain moment, a government is replaced by an opposition. And I think that's what the French rally is preparing for, and that's what I meant. If the alternative is between a centre party and an extreme party, then one day you're going to get the extreme party.
And this is an opposition who are very anti-European Parliament, anti the EU, anti-European integration, and who really want to shake things up here and the way things are done. But Klaus Welle, thank you so much for being with us tonight on Euronews and for all your analysis. And